morning, Jeremy.
Now, this morning we are talking about James Butters, which sounds like a familiar name for some reason, but I can't think why.
Maybe it's to do with the stuff we put on our bread and jam.
Probably it is, but did he invent it? Did he?
No, he didn't. But it's interesting because one wonders why he's on the Warrnambool Pioneer Board, because he was only here for a couple of years.
Right, okay. There seems to be a theme with some of the people we've met so far, is they've had very short interludes in Warrnambool. But
most of his stories about other places.
Right, okay. So where do we start with his story then?
Well, we're talking about James Stewart Butters, who was born in Blairgowrie in Perthshire in 1832 and died at the Red Bluff Hotel in Sandringham in 1912.
Right.
And he was a very flamboyant gentleman. One might almost say that he was the model for the original Diamond Gym.
Right, okay.
And we'll get to that as we go along.
Okay, all right.
So he had training in the drapery trade before he left Scotland.
Right. And
when he came to Victoria in 1853, he was employed as a draper in Melbourne briefly, and then he partnered up with another guy and they came to Warrnambool and opened a drapery business, but were only here a couple of years. And his character started to show through because selling drapery wasn't what he was cut out for.
Right.
So he headed off back to Melbourne.
What sort of person does make a good draper?
I'm not qualified to answer that.
No, I don't know.
So he headed back to Melbourne and became a gold and share broker,
right,
which was much more exciting and much more in his line of activity. We could jump all over the place. And I thought I'd just hit on some of the highlights of his career.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
He became a councillor of Melbourne when he went back there, and in fact was mayor in 1867. And despite his flamboyant character, made significant contributions to Melbourne and Victoria, I suppose. He was 3 times a Member of Parliament, twice as a Member of the Assembly and once as a Member of the Council. He was expelled from the Assembly on one occasion for corrupt practices, but got himself re-elected somehow or another.
Right.
He was the founder of the Victoria Club, and quite a gentleman around town. It's claimed that he was one of a group who were instrumental in bringing the game of bowls to Victoria from England. He was a long-serving member of the Melbourne Hospital Committee. There are certain characteristics about this guy that make him parallel to a very recent mayor of the city of Melbourne.
Yes,
with
right.
associations with the history of the hospital and sundry other things.
Right.
And a couple more of his major contributions while he was in office were the establishment of the Melbourne Town Hall, the building of that, and the Western markets, not the Victoria markets, but the ones in West Melbourne, which are long gone.
Right,
So he was associated with all of that.
Right, okay. So he certainly managed to do a fair bit for Melbourne, but for Warrnambool, he did a bit of drapery and that was it?
That's it. There's no evidence that he ever came back to Warrnambool.
Right, okay.
So he was just here for that brief period.
Yeah.
But he did go off to Fiji for a while.
Okay.
I'm not clear how he got this gig, but somehow or another he got in the pocket of the King of Fiji, and he was invited by the King to go over to Fiji and establish the Parliament in Fiji.
Wow.
And for a number of years he was the Speaker of that Parliament.
Right.
And he wrote the standing orders for the Fijian Parliament, and as the satirical magazine Punch mused at one stage, he would be very well equipped to write the standing orders for a parliament because he knew every one of the Victorian standing orders because he'd been convicted on every one of them at some stage along the way.
So certainly a pretty colourful character then.
He was, yeah. There's a quote from the Argus as part of his death, I think, which sums the guy up reasonably well, if I can read part of that to you. It's after his death. Removes a characteristic and picturesque figure from the daily life of Melbourne. It was not what Mr. Butters did which made him of remarkable interest, so much as what he was. In his prime 40 years ago, there was no better man in the city. He was seen everywhere and known to everybody. He was invariably smartly dressed, a fine soldierly figure, dark hair, which even the fingers of old age could not whiten. In mid-Victorian costume, with the frilled ruffles of his shirt front punctuated with the gleam of diamonds and frothing out through the open-breasted vests of the day, he was, say those who knew him, a smart-looking man, a man to take the eye. There's the Diamond Jim reference.
Just imagining him wandering down Liebig Street in that sort of get up.
I don't know whether he was that flamboyant while he was here. But
so how does he end up on the board then? How does that happen?
Because somebody paid the money to have his photo put up there.
Right. Do any of his curtains still exist anywhere, do we know?
No, I doubt it somehow or another.
You haven't got one down at the Historical Society?
I don't think his heart was in the drapery business somehow or another.
It was a front for the diamonds, obviously. Ray, thank you very much.
You're welcome, Jeremy. Okay.